Okay, today we're going to look at our first data structure called an array. So before, if we had some test scores, so let's say we had int test 1 was 100%, and then int test 2 was a 75, int test 3, they got a 90, right, and so on. This is fine to assign data to individual variables whenever we have a very small number of variables. But what if instead of a single student's tests, we were going to store data for a whole class full of tests? That would start to get cumbersome to assign a variable to every single one of these test scores for a whole class of students. So instead, we're going to use a data structure that can hold a whole lot of data, and that's called an array. So to declare an array, we have a few different options. One, we can do the data type and then an open close bracket to indicate that we're making an array. Then the name of the array, so tests for test scores, and then we're gonna put a semicolon. And that just declares that an array is going to be instantiated and it's going to be called tests, and it's going to hold integer values as its data elements. Now to assign a length or a size to this array, we're going to take its name, its variable identifier tests, and we're going to say that tests equals a new int array. And we're going to put the size of the array in the brackets. So tests equals a new array full of integers, and it's going to have 10 positions in it, 10 elements to hold that data. Okay, when the array is allocated memory, it's filled with either 0 or null depending on the data type. So since our array is integers, that's a primitive data type, it's going to fill the array with zeros. So now if we were to print system out print line, and we want to print one of those elements. So let's print the element, the very first element in our array, and that starts at position 0. Now when we run, okay, there's going to be an output of the 0. Oh, I forgot the S on tests. So we got an error. Let's try that again. Now we'll get the output of the element at the first position in the array, and that's a 0. And if I want to reassign a value of an element so it's no longer zeros but actual test scores, right? I could put in element 0 the test score of 100. Right, I could put in element 1, our next test score, maybe that was a 75. Right, I could put in element 2, oops, put my test score of 97. Okay, and then so on, right? If I try to assign a test score though that is outside of the length of my array. So let's do test.length and we'll see how long that is. So we'll system out print line. And we said we wanted 10 elements in the array. Let's go ahead and see how long that is. Since we're starting at index 0, right, there's our 10 elements, which means that 9 would be our last index in that array. So if I try to print out, or assign rather, so we'll do tests, element 9 will work, right, because we have 10 elements, so we could make that one a 60. But if I try to assign element 10, position 10, that would actually be the 11th element in the array, and our array only holds 10 elements. So if I go to run this, trying to assign something outside of the array, we're going to get a new error we haven't seen before called an index out of bounds. So let's run that and take a look at that error. Okay, here's our array index out of bounds exception. Okay, that's a mouthful. And it tells us afterwards index 10 out of bounds for length 10, right? Because position starts at 0, element 0, 10 elements would end at position 9, which is what we have right here. Okay, if I wanted to output some things that I do with my array. So for instance, instead of just printing a single element, let's add them up and average them. So we could do test element 0 plus test element 1 plus test element 2, right? Those are the ones that we've assigned already. And then we'll divide those by 3. Actually, let's do a double. So we'll divide them by 3.0. So we've got parentheses here. We've got parentheses there. So that should work okay. And we're treating these elements in the array just like we would individual variable assignments. So we can see down here, there's our average of those 3 test scores reported as a double. Now, assigning your test scores this way is not very efficient, not very much more efficient than it was assigning individual variables to them if we're going to put those elements in one at a time. We can do it that way, but it's not a very good use of our time. So instead, let's come back up here to where we declared our array. So we have an int array called tests, and instead of assigning our test scores individually one line at a time, we're just going to assign them in curly braces all together at once. So there's our 100, we'll have a 98, 75, 83, maybe somebody didn't do so hot, they got a 62, a 98 again, another 100, 73, 67, 99. Okay. And then we close that data. Now we have element 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right? That's 10 10 elements in our array. So it's going to have length 10. And this is going to declare and instantiate the array in memory, allocate that memory, and assign each of these values in their correct positions into the array. So now if we do our system out print line, and we can do tests.length, right? That's the number of elements in our array. And let's add up all of our test scores. So we have test element 0 plus test element 1. Right? And you can see how if we had 100 test scores to add up, this would be a very cumbersome way to average them together, right? For 10, we'd be listing 10 variables. So rather than traversing our array, one element, like typing them out one element at a time, let's make a loop, and we'll loop through this array. So for I starting at 0, and we'll do I less than the length of our array, and then increment one time, or one each time, so it changes to a semicolon. Okay, now we can start at 0, which is 100, then go to the next one, 98, 75, 83, 62, and we'll keep doing that until we get to the length of the array minus 1, because we're doing a strictly less than symbol. So each time we see, or we capture an element here, we'll do we're going to need a scores. So let's come back up here and declare our double, or an int for the scores. We'll start that at 0. Okay, now we can come down inside of our loop, and scores is going to take the previous score and add test element I to it. So that will add up all the scores. Then our average, which is going to be a double, is going to take the integer scores and divide it. Let's see, let's cast scores as a double. And actually, I think I went parentheses the other way. I get Python and Java confused. So double scores, and then we're going to divide that by tests.length, so the number of scores in the array. And then we'll print the average and see how that works. So let's compile, see if we need to do any debugging. Okay, so error, not a statement. Oh, I think I do need to have parentheses then the other way. I get Java and Python mixed up all the time with casting, because one uses parentheses. And there we go. Okay, so our average is 85.5. Right? We added up all the scores, divided by the number of scores, and there's our average.